All right, yo, everybody. Here is another episode of the Mind Body Marathon. And on today's show, we have Dr. Matt
Hi.
is joining me with Laura Rybka, who is a coach, Division One coach at Kent State University here in Ohio, formerly a coach at Grove City.
Mhm.
Yeah. And just started at Kent State. And this is a fun episode. We're going to talk about her career and her coaching philosophy and some just running in general. So thanks for joining us on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So we were just talking before the show, and Laura was she's got a we've known her for what, probably 10 years now.
Basically since you opened
Yeah,
almost.
probably
Yeah.
2012.
Yeah.
And so you were in high school running at CVCA, and I remember you had some crazy history because we were talking earlier about how you're, celiac and gluten free and all that now.
Yeah.
But you had a lot of really big issues when you were in high school.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
you basically couldn't run for the majority of your career, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was like kind of insane. I had a pretty good start my first 2 years. I had gone on a mission trip with my family when I was 11, and I had a lot of stomach problems after that.
Yeah.
And
Where did you guys go?
It was Jamaica. So, and just kind of, I remember just like never being hungry after like I got sick. I had a parasite, and after that, like it just kind of ebbed and flowed where I'd feel better, I'd feel worse, I'd feel better, I'd feel worse. But like when I was mid high school, it got a lot worse. So like to the point where like I had trouble like eating without getting sick. And I went to, I think from 12 to 18, I went to 9 GI doctors.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
And we couldn't figure it out.
Okay, so so basically from 12 to 18, you saw 9 different GI doctors.
Yeah.
And they were just struggling to try to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, they could not figure it out. I had like an NG tube. I eventually had to have like a surgical tube put into my small intestine because I would just like it was really bad. And so
so we initially met you because you kept getting injured.
Yes.
And so you were trying to run through all this, and obviously you couldn't repair any bones or muscles because you weren't getting the nutrients in.
Yeah. So I didn't really run my junior and senior year of high school because I was like in and out of the hospital. And I went to Malone University not to run, but because it was close to the Cleveland Clinic and I had just been diagnosed.
Yeah.
So my freshman year of college, I had to be on an all liquid diet. So, cause like, they figured it out. I have like a really rare GI condition, but they're like, you like basically need to give your GI system a rest. And you need to go to college close to home because you have to make this like liquid crap. So I went to Malone not to run. And then I did start running again.
Yeah.
Cause I was like actually absorbing what I was eating.
And you grew.
And I did. I grew like 5 inches when I was 20. So yeah, which is crazy. And then I did join the cross country team. I remember Coach Hazen was out just like doing something with the course, and I went up and talked to him. And so then I started training, and then I got like 6 stress fractures the next 2 years because my bones were so compromised from being sick all of high school. And gratefully that got better, but kind of had, a lot of other injuries in repercussion to that. I think just from malabsorption.
Yeah.
So
your bones are about 40% protein by dry weight. And if you went darn near a decade not absorbing the adequate protein and, micronutrients with it, like calcium and magnesium and all that, and how in the world are you going to build bones? So like your frame was just frail.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like I would literally get healed from a stress fracture. And I was a little bit over aggressive with how fast I came back, but like I'd get better. And then like a week later, I'd get another one. And so kind of midway through college, I was just like, this is not working. Like I had a good talk with Coach Hazen. He's like, your running career is your whole life. He's like, you just need to be patient. And so I kind of had a choice to either just quit the team, walk away, do some other stuff, or to help in a different way. So I ended up like getting my recruiting like license. You had to take a test.
Yeah.
And then I started helping like with like coaching and recruiting. And I'm really grateful Coach Hazen let me do so much, because otherwise I think most coaches would not let somebody that's, sophomore, junior in college be able to help that much. And I just found like, I love this sport and I love helping other people. And I feel like a lot of my injuries have also driven me to just like learn about the science and things like that. So that's how I figured out like I wanted to coach at the college level. Before that, I didn't even know it was a possibility.
Yeah. And when I was in college at Malone with Hazen, he definitely was really good about recruiting us, because we were at the NAI at that point, so we could have a little bit more leeway to talk to recruits and all that. And he was really good about that. So you would definitely learn a lot of cool things from him, and that's why so many of his ex-athletes are coaches, because he just really integrated his athletes into that process. And so you're definitely a product of that. So what are you running now?
Yeah. So my bones did get a lot better, and before I moved to Grove City, during COVID, I was running like 65 or 70 miles a week in 6 days. So like my body can handle a lot. Like
that's impressive.
Yeah. So it was crazy, and it was like a huge blessing because I just love it.
Have you ever done like bone density testing just to see like where you're at?
I did in college. I did at the beginning of college, and it was like, I think it was like borderline like osteoporosis. It was bad. And then at the end of college, it was like on the very low end of normal. So yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Okay. So then now you're coaching at Kent State.
Yes.
How long you been there?
Been there since the summer. So late July. Yeah.
And how does some of this history of your illness and your injuries and all that, how does that integrate into your coaching philosophy?
Yeah, I think that one thing I've just loved the sport. I've loved running. I remember being in elementary school, not being able to sleep before the mile run because I was like so excited, which is just weird. I know. But I feel like I've just loved it my whole life. And I'm just like grateful when I can do it. And I feel like part of coaching is sharing that love. Like I want to coach people that love it the way that I love it and help to grow that love for this sport. But I think also too, just realizing like I'm a very goal-oriented person. And prior to like getting sick, I was like, I have these goals. I'm going to hit them. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And I think like some of the things that happened almost helped me be able to take a step back and be like, okay, what are the things that matter that aren't performance?
Yeah.
So I think too, to just value the work, value the process, the community, and pushing yourself to see like what you can do.
Yeah, one of the big things I noticed with you is just a general sense of gratitude, like genuinely being thankful for every run you get. And I think even if you're an elite athlete in college at Division I level, you don't even think of that, you know, and then you don't even realize like how beneficial it was for you to be running comfortably through high school, and then maybe you're struggling with an injury in college, and it's a new dynamic you have to sort of understand.
Yeah. And I think too that like it can't, hopefully not, but it can be taken away at any point.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you did this season. I wanted to do this next season, but to just like step in the moment and be grateful. Hey, you made it to here. You placed this, you ran this, rather than just
we
like
don't
pushing.
pat ourselves on the back enough, I think.
No, I don't think so. But that's like what makes successful people too. So yeah.
Hey, Woods, my coach when I graduated from Malone, he had this perfect saying for me, and I've said this before. He would always say, "Don't squeeze, don't want it too much." And he would because he sensed that it would get into that psychology of like, I'm going to do this come hell or high water. And it's like, that's not the right mindset. I mean, you should have visualization. You should have a goal. You should put it in a mindset, but it's like, it should be sort of a rhythm to it. It should be sort of a comfortable approach, not all consuming.
Yeah. And I think you have to have balance in your life. And if like running is the most important thing to you, like it will put too much pressure on that thing, and I think it will crumble.
Well, you'll wrap your identity around it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a very dangerous thing.
Especially post-collegiate, like where once you have that away, if you don't have the resources, a good community of racing afterwards, like, one of my patients brought it to my attention once that like football has the most depression. Because like 99.99% of football players come the end of high school, never get to play again.
Yeah.
They don't have softball league or football leagues, post, like we do for softball, like, churches or stuff like that. So like come football, your senior year, your last game.
There's like rec soccer and you can still run
but like come football,
basketball,
they don't have that.
There's like men's leagues, but yeah, you're right. There's no continuity with football. That's why I think flag is such an important thing.
Yeah. But like with running, it's one of those things where you have it open. I mean, it's the most open sport. You can literally just put on a pair of shoes and go anywhere, unless you're like, in a jail cell or something like that. But
even then they can run marathons in jail now.
Oh yeah, they can.
Have you seen that documentary?
No, I haven't.
It's pretty cool.
I should watch it.
Yeah.
Well, not in your
It's
cell.
called 26 to Life. It's actually pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Where this group of people go around to jails, and then they train the inmates up to run a marathon along the perimeter walls of the different prisons, and then they literally will do like 200 laps in the inner wall and then just run a marathon or some crazy number.
Yeah.
insane.
But like with that though, if you ingrain yourself so much in the sport and then you're not like around teammates and stuff like that, it can lead to a lot of like psychological like depression and stuff like
Yeah.
Well, I always say to college kids when they graduate, I'm like, oh, now the fun begins.
Yeah.
You know, like now you get to do whatever you want. You get to run trail races. You can go run races in Europe. You can travel the world. You can do marathons. Like it's like you don't get burned out through school. Like don't, you know, get too frustrated with it. Like don't let it control you in that way. Like still have a good time with it. And that's
Yeah.
what I love about your philosophy because I feel like so many Division I coaches just want to burn out their athletes, just use and abuse, and then they hate it by the end.
Yeah. And I think that's one of my goals is like, I want you to love it your whole life. I don't want you to be broken at the end of your career. And I'm never going to like push you to the point where I get more benefit, like, or you perform better, but then like it's hurting you. And I think like that's where you have to have that love and almost like curiosity.
But how do you balance that with the rigors of being a Division I coach?
That's hard.
Because like now
yeah.
you have the roster issues and all that now.
Yeah. I think it's about the process. And for me, even finding people, it's like, I want people that like, maybe you're not going to score or do something this year, but I see this potential and I like want to give you a shot because I see that love. And I think you have to love the work. Like, I think you have to love the work and the process more than you love the results or you will not survive.
I was thinking about this concept, pretty much this exact concept last night, watching the Notre Dame Penn State college football semifinal. And it's interesting because it's like you think about like a school like Ohio State, they're going to get a transfer pretty much every year. They're going to get a high end transfer every year, pretty much the highest end transfer because like who wouldn't want to throw to Jeremiah Smith? But then it's like a school like Notre Dame or Penn State, they're basically going to have to develop the athlete through. So then they were talking about like how Drew Ayler, the Penn State quarterback who came from Medina, you know, he pretty much started as a freshman and he's kind of working his way through. And now he's a junior. And it's like, well, that program has to develop the athlete in a different way. So like, for instance, in track now and cross country, you know, maybe the NC States get the transfers, but you as a Kent State coach, you can develop because you're just a different type of program.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the identity now that you're kind of having to take into. So walk us through the roster size changes and what that is now.
Oof, yeah. So basically, for those that don't know, they are moving cross country to a 17 limit on each side. So scholarship is now equal to rosters, which doesn't mean every school gets those scholarships, just like a school with a lot of money could. And then track is 45. So for more track focused programs like us, that does limit the amount of distance runners we can have. But like I can also have cross country only kids, which is what I'm doing. So kind of it's like I basically think, oh, I think that you're going to be a really good 10K runner, but you need, you know, a year or two to develop. So you're going to do 2 years where you're doing just cross country and then you're competing maybe unattached in track and then moving you into track. And then if things go well, you also have grad school and you have like extra eligibility. So that's the way I'm approaching it because I think if, you know, I cut, oh, like you have to be performing right now or you get cut from the team. I think that almost takes away. I love development. And I think like in distance, you have to have time.
So what was the roster size before? Like what were the numbers before?
We were actually not too out, like we weren't too, I would say, over the roster limits.
But like what were they allowed to be?
I think there was like no limit.
There was no.
Yeah. Scholarship was less, but like, yeah, no limit. So you could like have 90 people and you see a lot of D1 programs that have like 40 women on their team or something like that.
Yeah. They kind of hide athletes in there and
Yeah. So it does change things. It does change the approach, but also I think like it also in some ways makes it like, I don't really care. Like you got to have a certain level of talent, but like, if you're not bought in, I do not want you on my team.
Does it make you, because I know a lot of programs are immediately when they got this roster size, they immediately went to thinking about international athletes and that kind of thing. Is that the demand that you sense is coming your way, or are you still kind of recruiting like locally, or how does that work with you?
I think that there's a lot, like you even look at programs like UNC, almost all American. I think there's a lot of American kids that want to work hard, that want to be on a team. And I think like having some international athletes, like it adds like a really cool facet to the program. And I think there might be some that fit. But I also I think there's a lot of American kids out there and I feel like a lot of them just need a shot. And so I think for me, at least right now, we're going more local. Not to say that we wouldn't also get some international athletes as well, but
Yeah.
that's kind of my
curious,
philosophy,
if
goal. Yeah.
I was curious that if there's pressure from an AD or something like that to get to an international athlete to you know what I mean, to have an immediate success versus the developmental program side of it.
Yeah. I think there might be a little bit, but I also think the track program has been really successful. And so maybe there's a little less pressure there because they've done really well on both sides. So I think if track was losing a lot, that might be a different conversation. So yeah.
How do you manage if you have a team that's doing really well and healthy, and you have now the roster cap of how do you make the decision of redshirting somebody to save them for more of a chess game where it's a strategy of all right, we now have 3 or 4 really good milers, 2 or 3 really good 800 runners and stuff like that. I'm going to need you in year 5
year or 2 from now.
Yeah. I think you look at an athlete and their development. So if a kid has been doing, say they're an incoming freshman, say they've been doing 70 miles a week in high school and they've been training really hard. Okay. Their ceiling is probably they probably are ready to go and they're ready to take the training, and maybe their ceiling is they're a little bit closer.
Do you see that 70 miles a week from high school?
I think there's some high schoolers that do that much. I'm just I had my old school. I had a couple.
It's true. I've I always kind of talk about how when I was in high school, you didn't really know what other kids were doing because there was no internet really.
Yeah.
There just wasn't.
Yeah.
There wasn't the communication. But my sophomore, literally if you talk to other kids, you're like, oh wow, you're doing 30 miles a week. Holy cow. But then in college, my sophomore year, online running logs started to get popular. So that by the time we were recruiting athletes by the junior year, all of a sudden we saw the mileage jumping because these kids saw what other kids were doing.
Yeah.
And then it became from kids from basically averaging 30 miles a week to then 50 miles a week, almost overnight.
Yeah. It's crazy. And I think, but there's a lot of kids that are maybe doing less. I had one athlete at Grove City that I think his high school mile PR was 4:45 and he ran a 32:20 his freshman year in the 10K. And he was running I would just see on Strava, he would just do these long runs and they would be 6:30 pace for 16 miles. I was like, that guy's an aerobic monster.
Yeah.
And so I think and he was not doing much the rest of the week. And I was like, he has a lot of potential. So I think it's finding the people that are bought in and also maybe have a lot of boxes that haven't been checked. So if it's hey, you've been doing 25 miles a week and our normal cross country is 70, they might need a year, right? So I think that's where you kind of evaluate where they in their development. And I got this from Coach LeBady at Akron. But he always would say I would have a 4-year plan. So I always have a long-term plan for every single athlete on the team and where we think you can go and how we're going to increase and develop your specific training over 4 years or 5 years.
How do you go about the opposite then, where you have somebody who's high mileage, but they're kind of underperforming because it's kind of crap mileage? And how do you talk to them about dialing it down a little bit? Because, when you're in high school, you're oh, I'm doing 70 miles. The next stage should be 90 miles. And then you come to college and then the coach is
a Cam Levins who does 150 miles a week kind of thing.
And then now all of a sudden you need to be hey, we're going to stop for a second. Even though you're able to handle 70, you're just doing a bunch of junk miles.
Yeah.
We want to zone it back down to, 60 miles, but get good quality workouts. How does that conversation happen?
It's hard because I think a lot of people are married to the number, especially you're saying the online running logs where it's oh, I only did 60 miles or I only did this. It's well, you did a 16-mile long run, that was whatever pace and you did this workout and this workout. So I think when you're talking with somebody like that, it's why do you care about the number? Because it's not about the number. The body doesn't know miles. So it's hey, look at this quality work you've done. I am big on 1 day off a week. So it's what we're doing in 6 days. And it's look at these other people that have done this and been successful. And it's hey, if this doesn't work, then let's revisit it. So I think it's more, I'm always going to explain why we're doing what we're doing. And often with kids that are doing a lot of junk mileage, they're weak, they're inefficient, they're not coordinated. So that's where we're going to first get you strong. We're going to get you coordinated. And we're going to get you in the weight room and work on that stuff before we increase, because you're probably going to get hurt if we don't do those things.
Yeah. And I think I think Parker Valby in situations like that where people were running less days a week and doing a lot of cross training and just staying healthy, I think conversations like that are becoming more prevalent where kids are not always having the mindset that like, I have to hit X mileage per week. It's more about how am I racing? How am I progressing? And that is becoming a little bit more of a conversation point because I feel like we've come across so many athletes at this clinic where they'll end up running super fast off ridiculously low volume. And then the teams see that in the area. They're like, dude, he only does like 30, 40 miles a week. And it's like, that's pretty incredible,
Yeah.
like, and so let's kind of circle back though. Like, so say you kind of brought up a good point, like being uncoordinated, not very strong, that kind of stuff. So what are some of your like ancillary approaches there?
Yeah. So I kind of have like a system of things I work athletes into. So it starts with, I have like 6 or 7 different core routines we do. We do 1 to 2 a day. We do them pre-run and they hit all the things that tend to be weekend runners. And I'm always like researching, looking, revamping, and there's like progression to them. So they're supposed to start them in the summer. And then when they come in, they're supposed to be able to do all of them. And from that alone, especially I would say on the women's side, I've seen like you can literally, they're hunched over and now they're running tall. And it's hardcore. Like some of them are like, my heart rate's like 120 right now, so getting them strong.
So like on a daily basis, like how many minutes before the run and after the run, like what does that look like from a number standpoint?
So it's kind of from we call it activation, but it's really core. So we'll do, I'm gonna have different ones, we do different days, but normally I would say anywhere from like 15, once a week we'll do like a 30-minute circuit with like plyos. And then we also do wickets almost every week, probably 4 or 5 times a week, which that forces like some more of that coordination. And then we'll also do like some mobility post run. Yeah.
I think that's so cool because we've mentioned before, like I think on one of the podcasts I had my buddy on who went and spent some time in Kenya. He went and spent a summer in Kenya training. And he's like, one of the things that they do, and we've kind of seen this before with some of the Kenyan athletes here, even in the States, is they'll do like weird dancing before for like a warm up, they'll do like the leg kicks with rhythm and snapping the fingers and all sorts of stuff. And what's crazy is they actually have like really good rhythm and coordination.
Yeah.
And that is tied to, how much it's tied to like what kind of muscle recruitment they're getting during the run. Like how much control do they have over their body? Like we get that running is a very predictable movement pattern, but the critical thing is what muscles can you shut off? And it's about timing and all that sort of stuff. And the more control you have over your body, the better you can do that. So I think it's really cool that you're exposing the athletes to that.
Yeah.
And I think like, I've also heard on like a lot of times when you get to these Eastern African teams, like the Ethiopian team, and especially they'll spend, a long time prior to the run doing plyometrics and form drills and just coordination stuff prior to the run. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And I'm big on like, hey, what we're doing right. So if you can't like run correctly, you're either going to get hurt or it's going to slow you down. So first we have to get your form a lot better before I'm going to give you more mileage. Yeah.
So walk us through like because I know we're kind of in a frenzy right now with the double threshold and that whole world of things. Like how are you kind of like running that dynamic and where are you at on that spectrum?
I think that there's a progression to training. So I think that the purpose of the double threshold is to get in more volume without completely exhausting an athlete. So if you can't, my thing is like, we do a lot of tempo. We do a lot of threshold, probably like the men were doing up to like 14 by K this fall, but like true threshold, not like you're running really fast.
How are you finding the true threshold?
It's so we do an hour time trial at the beginning of the season, or the men do 10 miles, the women do 8 miles, and that is your tempo.
Yeah.
And then your threshold is 15 to 20 seconds faster. And if you I was not as strict at Kent this fall, but at Grove City, if they went too fast, I sent them home or I didn't race them. Yeah.
So you do a 10-mile time trial. When you tell them to do the time trial, what are you saying? Like all out? Or are you saying like 80, 90%?
So
effort?
you start kind of like, let's say like start around this pace, and then like, if you have more left the last couple miles, bring it home. So normally none of them have run anything all out that far, but it's like I want a pretty pure effort.
Yeah. And then, so then the threshold pace that you're using will be faster than that?
Yeah. It'll be, I would say 10 to 15 seconds faster than that. And then you can tell if somebody's getting fitter, I might drop it. And I do have charts where kind of, you race this time, so this is roughly where you are.
Yeah.
But then people can't argue with me that their tempo should be faster. So
yeah.
that's, and I think for the double threshold, it's like, if you're not able to do 40 minutes of tempo or straight, like consistently, you're not ready for double threshold. I think it's like, hey, like, okay, you're able to do, 50 minutes a lot of weeks. Like, I think we can split it up now, but you have to get to a certain, it's like only for athletes that have reached that point where they need that extra stimulus, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And I think it's interesting to hear everybody come to all these different conclusions about what the threshold is and how to integrate it throughout the week. And so okay, so like let's go to a track specific athlete. So are you still doing thresholds through the season?
We'll like 10K guys will do it a lot. And then the other guys will kind of like we'll brush up on it every couple weeks to just maintain it.
I know it's interesting talking with Cam a couple weeks ago on on the podcast with him. He was talking about how he's a 15.5 guy and he'll do 20K of threshold every week.
Yeah.
And the only other workout they do is hill sprints.
Yeah. That's insane. Yeah.
And
but it works. It's
just absolutely wild. And he made the comment, which was so interesting, that he's just now getting to the point where he's running his thresholds at the same pace that he did his thresholds at Miami. Because he was obviously overrunning them.
Yeah.
And he's like, it's crazy how much he had to actually step back from that and then build like a pretty big foundation and then work his way up. But it's like crazy. Like he's probably going to run like 13-15 in indoor this year. And it's nuts that can run that fast of just doing thresholds.
Yeah. That's for the men. So my goal for the teams this fall was to learn how to do tempo and threshold and to get stronger. And you did see some pretty big drops for a lot of athletes. And
especially Beatty went crazy.
He like literally threshold and fixing his form. And he's so dedicated. Like that's where it was like, he was sick, like our 2 other key workouts. So he didn't even do like the kind of like race prep things, but that was just aerobic fitness, like, which I think people like the fancy workouts, but at the end of the day, like you got to be strong and you got to be aerobically fit. And if you don't have those things, like you can't move on.
That's like 90+% of the actual race, especially in cross, maybe even closer to 90 and 99% of cross.
Yeah.
You just have to be aerobically strong. And so many times, like in college, I've had seasons where I would be injured throughout the season. I would just cross train and I'd still be able to race well in cross just because I was so aerobically fit from cross training.
Yeah. People underestimate that. Like you were mentioning Parker Valvey. I think I calculated it one time, and the volume of cross training she was doing or said to be doing was like close to like, plus her running was like close to 90 miles a week of volume. Like,
but how much actual running volume was she doing?
I think like 30 miles.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But if you get like, over 2 hours of cross training on your easy days, like that's a lot more than a run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's pretty much what Cam was doing through Miami and Ole Miss. And then when he got to, now he's doing about 80-ish miles a week, but it took him, 4 or 5 years to work up to that point.
Yeah. And I think that it takes time. You have to let your body adapt, Yeah.
Which is pretty wild in your scenario that you were able to get up to 60 miles a week.
Yeah. I just stopped putting emotion into running and I approached it logically, like I do as a coach. And I think that's when I was like, okay, I can do this. Now I can do this. And there was like I stopped getting hurt as much when I started being very intentional about my progression and also nutritional intake. So like I literally would just buy this giant jar of peanut butter and make sure that I ate the whole thing in addition to whatever else I was eating when I was doing that much mileage. And I think that also helped keep me healthy. Yeah.
So you're pretty much gluten-free?
Yeah.
What other diet stuff are you because I know like you're canary in the coal mine with that. So
yeah. It is, I am gluten-free. If I don't exercise, cause my, GI issue is a motility issue, which means like my small intestine is like partially paralyzed essentially. If I don't exercise or move, I do have to eat more liquids because my system doesn't move as much on its own.
Yeah.
But I would say that's about it. Like, I'm really grateful for that from, where I was. Yeah.
Do you have athletes that have, other type of like food allergies or other type of food intake stuff where it's now inhibiting them from training?
Yeah. I've had some. Yeah. And I think it's like even just being empathy. Hey, like I know what you're going through. And like, if you don't get an answer right away, keep pushing. And I've found a lot of people struggle with stomach stuff during workouts, and long runs. Like that's, it's like a pretty consistent issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would definitely say that as well. So do you have how all encompassing is some of your coaching philosophy? So we've talked about the ancillary stuff. We talked about the coordination stuff. Do you go into like having actual like nutritional conversations with the athletes? And
Yeah, I will, because like running is a sport where like every single part of your life is going to affect it. Sleep, nutrition, even like how much stress you have. I had in my previous school, like most of the men's team were engineering majors. So I had to account, hey, this is their midterm. They're all not going to be sleeping. They're going to be really stressed out. And so I got to back off training. Right. So we do have like holistic conversations. And I think one of the things I found that's like really big is just the fueling and the timing. I think people, like men and women, are afraid. They're afraid to eat enough, and they don't approach their nutrition as a discipline as like their training. It's like, I'm going to do all the things training, but then I'm going to like not eat dinner for like 2 or 3 hours. Well, you literally just wasted that workout. So I think like having multiple conversations, like, hey, if you do this, this is what will happen. And I think you can't force people to do things. You can offer information.
So what are some of the key points you'll give them?
I'll say, like you got to eat, if you have lunch, you got to eat a snack if it's going to be a long workout. 30 minutes after a hard workout, you got to get something, chocolate milk, something with protein and carbs, and then hopefully a meal within an hour. I am also big. Protein synthesis happens more at night. So it's like eat protein before bed. If you're sore and you're not recovering, like get like 30 grams in, whether it's, I don't know, like a chicken, some chicken, some chocolate milk, a protein shake. So that's something I push. And then the iron is the other issue. Like I can, like, so many people have low iron, and it's like, unfortunate. Like they don't realize it till it's too late. And then it's like, well, there goes your season. Yeah.
I've been going through a lot of lactate research recently, and there's a lot of really cool stuff that's coming out about the lactate, like lactic acid and lactate and its role in the brain. And lactate actually drastically manipulates your appetite, like drastically. So if you have like a long run where you're not producing a ton of lactate and you're just kind of running some easy mileage and just kind of covering the distance, then you'll be really hungry, like ravenously hungry afterwards. But if you do like a hard mile workout, you're probably not going to be hungry for quite some time after that.
Yeah.
And so you almost really do have to force somebody to eat in those realms because it literally suppresses appetite.
Or like, I just raced, I can't eat. They wait a couple hours. Well, like now you're going to take another day to recover. So I think it's like a discipline, it's like, hey, you're disciplined in all these areas. And if you truly want to be good, you have to be disciplined in your fueling as well. Yeah.
So one of the things that I think about that's really kind of I think a negative trend in running both high school and college is that people, I feel like, are racing a lot less than they ever used to. And I think one of the hard parts on that is you sort of lose the ability to just harden as an athlete and just become tough. And I feel like that's kind of a little bit of a missing component. How do you navigate being smart about the timing? Because, obviously, like Beatty did really well this year. And how many times did he race in the season?
Maybe 5 or 6.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But he's a veteran athlete, so he's gone through the years of it. But it's like, how do you get like an 18 to 20-year-old college kid who's just basically not very tough, like get him tough?
Yeah. So I have what I'll do is I'll have people do a workout and then a race. So we'll do like 2 by 10 minutes at tempo, and then we'll do a 3K race. Or we might do a moderate workout and then a race on Saturday. So I do race people tired until championship, because it's like, because if you're used to pushing all the way when you're not fresh, when you are fresh and when you're peaked, then you're going to be able to go to the well. Otherwise you're like, oh, I just am used to feeling good when I compete. I also have some very special workouts that are reserved to be more, and I've heard that they are more painful than the race itself.
Yeah.
One is like a mile at 3K, 20 minutes at tempo, mile at 3K, no rest. But you have to be ready for that. So I'll kind of stagger workouts like that when
just
we have
beat
the
them
space.
with sticks as they run by.
Yeah, but it's like the mental part. I think that's where it's like you can go a lot deeper than you think you can, and when you get to that level of pain, then you're able to like actually compete.
That when I had Hazen on the podcast, we were talking about that, like how he just had these ridiculous workouts where he just would, you would do mile repeats, and then he would come over, or we would do time trials, and then he would come over and be like, all right, we're going to finish off with more mile repeats. And Salazar used to be really big with that, like basically just doing insane stuff where you would race, and then even after the race, you'd do more workouts, just to get you tougher, literally for the point of that. That's that exposure, that lactate tolerance conversation. And I still think that component is important because in this world where everybody's obsessed with threshold now, I think they miss that high end, gritty feeling and maybe don't become quite as tough. They're almost afraid to race and afraid to hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Or that it, because it's so infrequent, has to be a good time. Like,
Mhm.
oh, you
Yeah,
know, like
that's a good
it has
point.
to be perfect. And I think like that's where, like, you know, maybe 5% of the races you ever do will everything line up. So you have to be able to just give it your all regardless of the conditions.
Yeah.
That's a good point because I feel like even in the general public, there's a lot of people that under race. They maybe will train a whole season for a marathon. They'll go 3 months training specifically, 4 months for a marathon, and then that's the only event they do.
Mhm.
And then it's crazy to me because it's like, well, you didn't test out your nutrition, you didn't test out the sleep before, you didn't test out the stress of like waking up and going through the routine,
Traveling.
Yeah,
like you got to do that stuff before the actual event itself. Yeah, traveling, great. It's like what to eat the night before, and like it's not like coming from your fridge. So you just got to make sure it's all, you got to just go through the whole routine. Um, so if you have an athlete that they don't race very often throughout the season, like how do you help them psychologically stay sharp even though they're not hitting like the times they may want?
That's where I'll put those tough workouts in there. I think if it's like a 10K runner, like you really should not run, I think, more than 3, maybe 4 10Ks a season. So it's like, okay, we're going to have you do, you know, like I would say, like, we're going to have you do 2-mile repeats at 10K, and then we're going to have you race a 5K, and then we're going to have you do more mile repeats at 10K, or we're going to do a hard workout in there. And I think it's, some people are able to go there no matter what. And I think they can just tap into it and they just have this natural ability to give everything. And I think other people, like, it takes 3 or 4 hard efforts for them to get there. So I think it depends on the person a little bit.
Yeah.
How has technology involved with this, with toughness? I know, like, for me, like, I see a lot of high school athletes and even some college athletes where they're just so focused at looking at their watch, and now that they have GPS, they have no idea. If I were to take their watch and be like, go run a 6-minute mile,
Oh man, it's impossible.
or a 5:30, they have no idea how to do that.
Yeah.
So they're, I mean, I've had girl athletes, I mean, not specific to gender, but like, just in mind, I've had 2 female athletes where they've purposely slowed down, like in a workout or something, because, oh, their time is off. Even though I'm like, well, how did you feel? And they're like, oh, I felt great. And I'm like, why would you do that then? Like, if you felt great during,
Yeah.
like, there's just some days, and we've all had this, where you're just having a workout and you're crushing it, and you're like, I don't know why I'm crushing it, but like,
Yeah. Well,
you
that's
just
the
take
thing.
it,
Like things line up.
take advantage of it. And there's other days where you've, like, you slept really well, you stretched, you did like everything beforehand, and you get to your second like 800 or mile repeat, and then you're like, oh god, this
Yeah, you
feels
feel
like
terrible.
garbage.
Do you
And
like let people wear GPS like in workouts and
Yeah,
races?
I do. I'm not in races as much. I think like one of the biggest problems with the data is like the data, to me, data is a tool. Heart rate's a tool. GPS is a tool. Everything is a tool, but it's not like your body. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
This is just data that you can take. But I think people, instead of taking it as information, like I'll run and I won't look at my watch till the end. Like I rarely look at it unless I'm like trying to, you know, do something specific or I don't know where I'm going.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of people will like, they'll be a slave to the watch rather than like they're ruling the run, and then the watch is just showing what they did.
Yeah.
So I think like that's where sometimes I will take watches away in workouts. Or it's just like having a conversation. Hey, this is data, you know, like learning how to feel your body and feel certain paces, like tempo and threshold. You need to be able to feel that, because if you're
Yeah.
getting sick, it might be a lot slower than it is on a day that you're healthy. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's that connection to the body and that self-awareness side of it that I think a lot of the data can pull away from because you're not in the moment, you're not connected to yourself. And I think that's a little bit of an issue. Do you have people fight you? They're like, "No, I'm not taking off my watch."
Yes, I did. At Grove City, I had one kid, so the whole team took it off. We collected them, and the other coach, like the one kid, hid it in his pocket, and he would not, like, he literally argued. He was like, "No, he wouldn't give it to coach," and like we were just like, "Oh," but and then we
I knew you were going
yeah,
to say that it had to
yeah.
be somebody.
Yeah, and it was like he was just so, but then he would never like log his workout so I could see what he did. So, but he was like so
Interesting.
obsessed with the data, he could not give up his watch. Yeah, yeah.
I kind of feel bad for athletes like that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, it's
It's like
like
they're not free. They're just a slave to some data, the point that is somewhat relevant if it's put into context, but most of the time it's not.
yeah, and you got to be able to trust yourself. I think that's where it's like I've seen people in races, they look down, like, this is way too fast. They freak out. And where it's like you were fine, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's helpful when you're by yourself or where you're kind of like learning certain things. It's almost like, I see it almost like as bumpers, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, but the goal is to not need the watch. Yeah.
Do you see a big difference between like track season versus cross,
Mhm.
where like with track you're just doing a lot more painful
Yeah.
like workouts versus, you know, like cross typically tends to be a little bit more tempo, like, you know, aerobic
Yeah,
type of-
threshold based.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think in track I am a little bit more specific with
Mhm.
like some of the speed, because it's like, okay, if you're trying to run this, like you do need to be able to just hit this, you
Mhm.
know? But I wouldn't say like there's a big difference between the two.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just had like a different track coach than I did for like cross country, and so they were not completely, but definitely different
Yeah.
styles. And our track coach was definitely like more of like old school, like I'm going to just pound you into the ground, and if you can handle it, you're going to be great, and if not, you're going to fall apart. And
Yeah.
I love that aspect, and I
Yeah.
love coming out of track and just being like, I could tackle the world. Like it doesn't
It gives you
it doesn't matter.
confidence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I just wondered, like at that D1 level, like do you still get like where like they come out of track just feeling a little bit like more like an iron nail versus
Yeah.
kind of like a softer metal, like during
Yeah,
cross?
I think you feel sharper because,
Yeah.
like, for me, the whole year is one build and one cycle.
Mhm.
And especially this year, because we were making up some like aerobic fitness, like they were not like sharp in cross. And that wasn't intentional, because it was like, we're really gonna like go, especially in outdoor, and I need to
Mhm.
build this to get to this. So you know, like I think that's where you should feel a lot sharper, especially in outdoor track. That's when you're like flying.
It is still so weird to me that women only run 6K in cross,
It is strange.
because
Yeah.
it really is a totally different event versus a 10K.
You could have a whole team of 800 runners on the women's side. And like, that was at Grove City. My women's team was almost all mid distance.
That's a good point. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And their training was completely different. Like, they did a lot of 300s. They did way shorter tempo, a lot of fartleks. The men were just doing like tempo threshold, like 8K pace, like, you know, high mileage. The training for both of those events is just like so different. Even the profile, like if the women moved up to an 8K, like very few mid distance women would be able to survive. And if they
Yeah.
did, it would compromise their track season. So yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you've been coaching for quite some time. Do you feel like athletes are getting injured at a higher rate now versus before, or is it about the same?
I feel like one of my goals is to keep people healthy. And so for each approach, I think overall people are getting injured more because they're not listening to their bodies. And there is this competition with Strava and data and times, where it's like, oh, if, you know, like Jacob is doing this, then I should do this. Or if like this pro is doing this, then I should do this. Well, they're pros for a reason, you know? Like, yeah, I think that's where people compare a lot. But like, I feel like for me, for my team and my philosophy, I really try to kind of go from where people are. So I have
Yeah.
like some women that are running 3 days a week right now. But like they're cross training hard on the other days and they're healthy. And so the goal will be to run more later. But if that's what keeps you healthy and I can be consistent with like those 3 days, then let's work with that, you
Yeah.
know? So
I think it's important to work in such a way that you're not tying the confidence of the athlete to the actual performance or the workout, you know.
Mhm.
And it's like, that's why, you know, going back to the cross training conversation and just not being obsessed with mileage or data, it's like, it's really important to just meet your body where it's at and just be smart about its progression. And
yeah.
I really love that philosophy. So now that we're rounding third here, any final points that you want to kind of give? We're already coming up on close to 45 minutes an hour.
Yeah, yeah. I would say that, like, I mean, I know that there's like a lot of people, like especially high schoolers out there that are probably stressed about like the roster limits and like, you know, that love the sport, but like even having coached like Division 3 and Division 2 as well, like there's so many, like there's so much benefit to all divisions. And
Yeah.
I think not boxing yourself into like, I have to do this to be a successful runner. I have to do this to be a successful runner. I think even with training, it's like, so this person's doing this, well, you might need to do this. And it's like not about what you do or don't do. It's what you need to do to succeed.
Yeah.
And enjoying the process and being patient, I think, like with yourself.
And I think a big thing too is like trusting who you're listening to, because so many times like people will look online to what other people are doing. They're like, well, that coach is doing this. And then they all of a sudden lose trust with their own coach.
Mhm.
And it's like, you just can't do that. Like, imagine going into a football game where there's so many complicated factors and you didn't trust your head coach. You thought the coach on the other sideline was better. Like,
Yeah.
you're never going to win that game.
No,
You're
no.
automatically lost.
And that it takes time. I think like that's where training takes time. Like remember my high school coach told me like it takes a year of consistency to like really start to see results. And I think people want results now. It's like, oh, I'm not PRing after 2 weeks of this new training.
Yeah.
Like, and just give it time and do the work, and then like let the results take care of themselves.
Well, back in the 90s, there when Mark Wetmore was coaching a lot of pros and early 2000s, somebody would apply to his group and want to be coached by him, and he would often just be like, "Okay, well, come back in a year after you've done over 100 miles a week for a year, and then come talk to me." It's like, do the volume, put in the base work, then come talk to me.
Yeah, and
It's like, that's such an interesting approach.
It is, and I think it takes so much patience.
Yeah.
Like I think distance running takes more patience than almost anything else. And even if you do everything right, success is not always guaranteed.
And I know you see this all the time too, because you look at what happens from high school to college to professional, and you could never guess who pops professionally
No.
in our sport. Because if you looked at their high school career, you'd be like, oh, so-and-so is going to be the best. Like, no, watch 5 years later, they're not relevant.
Yeah.
Like, they might have developed a little bit too soon, too early, and maybe they didn't have great connections in college and all that. Maybe they lost interest or whatever. But like, who makes it to each next level is not always who you think, because it does take time. But it's all about internal motivation and just staying the course and just being smart about it.
Yeah. And I think love for it. I think too, like you see people, like what gets people through the highs and the lows that keep going is like a love for the sport.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, any final points here, guys? I think this was a great episode, and
just trust your coach.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll be sharing this one a lot to a lot of my high school patients. So
awesome.
All right. Well,
thanks so much
appreciate you, Laura, for coming in. This was great.
Yeah, thank you.
And thanks, Dr. Matt, for always being on the show here.
Absolutely.
All right. Till another week here. Thank you, guys. Dr. Leo here. Be sure to check out my new book, Faster Without Fail, Your Guide to Overcoming Injuries and Running Faster Than Ever. It is now available on Amazon. You could read reviews on the Amazon. You can check out what other people have said about it. But basically, if you want to revolutionize your running form and better understand how to stay injury-free within the sport, this is your guide. Feel free to reach out and let us know what you think of the book. I would love to hear your feedback. But again, please check it out on Amazon. Faster Without Fail. Appreciate it. Dr. Leo here. If you want to catch me in another setting, be sure to check out my YouTube page, Running Rehab, where you will find exercises on how to stay healthy with running, how to improve your running form, and a bunch of other tips and tricks on how to get over common injuries.